the state, a very critical swing part of the state. They're feeling much more confident in their chances in the state.
Yeah, Chris LaCivita, one of Donald Trump's key advisors this election, notably deep Virginia experience, and has said that Virginia, from his perspective and their campaign's perspective, is in play. When it comes to this conversation about President Biden and being the Democratic nominee, he has said he is staying in the race. I'm hearing what donors are saying. I'm struck by Lloyd Doggett, who said he heard from his constituents, the voters in his district. Have other members of Congress, as you're reporting, gleaned for you what voters are saying in these districts to their members?
I think it's going to obviously depend from district to district, but, we have heard privately that there is absolutely concern. And in addition to Lloyd Doggett making those comments yesterday, we heard Congressman Jared Golden from Maine's 2nd District come out with an op-ed in the Bangor Daily News yesterday, essentially saying, yeah, he was going to vote for Joe Biden, but he was pretty confident that Donald Trump was going to be president. And he literally said in that op-ed, he's okay with that. I think that's remarkable because Maine's 2nd Congressional District is one of the swingiest congressional districts on the map. Just to give you some perspective, in 2020, Congressman Golden won re-election there, but at the same time, Donald Trump took that district. So, I'm very curious to see what more members have to say about from these more competitive districts, what they're hearing, and how Biden could be impacting the down ballot race with these with his debate performance, because we know Republicans at the congressional level, campaign level, the Senate campaign level, and even the state legislature campaign level are really seeking to tie Democrats to Biden's performance.
They are, and I know that House Democrats, specifically the frontliners, have been taking a look at their numbers. Some folks have been running about 10 points ahead of the president. We'll see what that polling looks like in the coming weeks. Do you think Donald Trump is reluctant to, I was struck that he didn't attack President Biden on the age question. Do you think he's reluctant to do so because, Donald Trump himself is also old, 3 years younger than the president?
That is a very fair point. Donald Trump is old, and there have also been concerns about Donald Trump's age. I think Donald Trump, as seen in that debate, oftentimes comes across as more energetic than President Biden. However, I think there is that trepidation. But I think right now what you're seeing over the past few days, and you've seen Donald Trump go on the attack in some ways, but I think you're seeing the Trump campaign ride this wave. I think they're trying to let Democrats be in the spotlight, and the disarray in the party sort of take the spotlight, and they're taking a step back now. But with Donald Trump, we know that he isn't quiet for long, so I would be surprised if we didn't hear from him soon.
Julia, I am still waiting to hear what a black job is. National politics reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Thank you so much. Thank you, folks, for getting up way too early with us on this Wednesday morning. Don't go anywhere, because Morning Joe starts right now.
It sounds like you are not entirely convinced that he has convinced people that he can do it. You're leaving the door open.
Well, I am. I mean, it is open. Let's be candid. What we saw can't be unseen. That was an unsteady performance, and it raised questions about his physical condition. And that the campaign itself has acknowledged. And it's important for us. We have an obligation as a party who's committed to serving the future of our democracy. I happen to have a lot of confidence that President Biden, when he makes his final decision, will do it on the basis, as he's always done, of what's best for this country. How can he best serve? So big decisions for the president.
That was Democratic Senator of Vermont Peter Welch criticizing the Biden campaign, saying it should acknowledge concerns about the president's poor debate performance and not dismiss them. This, as one House Democrat is now publicly calling for Biden to bow out of the race. We'll tell you who it is and what this means for the party's unified front. Plus, for the first time, we're getting an explanation from Biden about his debate performance and what he's now blaming for his disappointing showing. Also ahead, why Judge Juan Merchan decided to delay Trump's sentencing in his criminal hush money case in the wake of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. And Rudy Giuliani is officially disbarred from practicing law in New York over his false 2020 election claims. We'll have all that straight ahead. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Wednesday, July 3rd. Along with Willie and me, we have the co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim Vandehei, the co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, getting up way too early, Simone Sanders-Townsend, and White House reporter at Politico, Eli Stokols, is with us this morning. And Willie, a lot of calls for the president to make calls. And my sources are telling me he's going to make them. Simmer. But here we go.
Yeah, and he's going to sit down for an interview today with George Stephanopoulos of ABC News. All this talk around the president, the pressure now ratcheting up on him to at least make some kind of decision. And President Biden made his latest and most candid remarks last night about his matchup with Donald Trump during a campaign fundraiser in Virginia. That was last night. The president apologized for his lackluster debate performance, blaming it on his extensive travel in the weeks before. He told the crowd he didn't listen to his staff, then joked he almost fell asleep on stage, adding, quote, "This is not an excuse, but an explanation." The president had traveled to France for the 80th anniversary of D-Day in early June, then went to Italy and Los Angeles. He returned to Washington on June 16th. That was 11 days before the debate. The New York Times this morning is taking a look at President Biden in the weeks and months before his debate performance. The paper reports, quote, "Mr. Biden was drained enough from the back-to-back trips to Europe that his team cut his planned debate preparation by 2 days so he could rest at his house." In the weeks and months leading up to the debate, several current and former officials and others who encountered him behind closed doors noticed he increasingly appeared confused or listless or would lose the thread of conversations. This is all from the New York Times. The paper continues, quote, "Like many people his age, Mr. Biden, 81, has long experienced instances in which he mangled a sentence, forgot a name, or mixed up a few facts, even though he could be sharp and engaged most of the time. But in interviews, people in the room with him more recently said the lapses seem to be growing more frequent, more pronounced, and more worrisome." The Times notes the occurrences, quote, "seem more likely when he was in a large crowd or tired after a particularly bruising schedule." So, Eli, you're part of a reporting team for Politico that includes our buddy Jonathan Lemire, out with a new piece titled, "We've All Enabled the Situation, Dems Turn on Biden's Inner Sanctum Post-Debate." So fill us in a little bit more, Eli, on what you're hearing.
Thanks, Willie. Well, we talked to more than 24 people who are close to this administration, close to the senior staff. And, you know, it's understandable after a debate performance like that there would be a lot of frustration and finger pointing. And a lot of that has been directed at the 5 or 6 very senior aides, people who've been with the president a long time, who a lot of people throughout the party now are sort of blaming for them being in this predicament, for cloistering the president, sort of trying their best to manage the age situation, to mitigate coverage of that by the media, to really attack coverage of that by the media, and more than anything, to come up with this rationale that he has to run for a second term. One person told us that, you know, that was a conversation that just never expanded beyond the senior group, all of whom would benefit by the president getting another 4 years in the Oval Office. And that this senior team has been sort of resistant to bringing in other opinions, to changing course. I mean, there's a lot of frustrations, not just about the debate, the decision to do it, how the president was prepped, but also just, you know, with how the president has not been able to lift his numbers. They look at the people who have been running this campaign for over a year from Delaware, some from within the White House unofficially, and they say, you know, these people have not moved the numbers. Joe Biden has not addressed his deficit. On Thursday night last week, he made things a lot worse. And that is largely because you got the same people cutting the ads, the same people figuring out how they're going to deploy the president, and the same principal who, you know, despite their very up-close knowledge and seeing the president every day and realizing his limitations, you know, they came up with this rationale for him to run anyway, that he's the only person who's ever beaten Donald Trump, and thus he has to be the candidate again. And I think now the view across the party, at least among a lot of the people that we talk to, is that that seems to be a pretty self-serving and maybe delusional case for another 4 years.
And Eli, the argument we heard last night from President Biden that he had been traveling in Europe, that's true. But as I pointed out, he'd been home for 11 days and been resting at Camp David for a week by the time the debate took place, which kind of reinforces the point, does it not, that he needed 11 days to rest before a debate and still performed that way. Is that the argument that they're going to go with for his performance on Thursday?
Well, they keep kind of adjusting the argument, which is a tell in and of itself. I mean, at first it was just a bad night, and now it's, oh, I was traveling 11 days before the debate, you know, a lot. And granted, those were grueling trips, going from Italy to Los Angeles overnight, doing the fundraiser after 2 trips to Europe. That is a lot to do right before the debate, and some people were nervous about that ahead of time. But, you know, the discrepancies here, the sort of changing picture, none of this is reassuring Democrats who are really concerned at this point about the sustainability of Biden's candidacy. The shifting explanations, not reassuring to people. And even though this is obviously damage control, this is an effort meant to sort of keep the trains on track here in a very difficult moment. It's also a huge shift for this White House that for 3.5 years, up until this point, insisted that nothing was wrong. And even the suggestion that the president had aged or lost a step, which now the White House is being explicit about to explain away the debate. For 3.5 years, that suggestion was dismissed out of hand. Reporters were attacked for writing it and suggesting that the things that were in plain sight about the president being very slow, say, to get into his motorcade, you know, not taking the big steps down from the main door of Air Force One, using the lower steps because there are fewer steps to climb. You know, all those things, there was just so much frustration and defensiveness and dismissiveness about those stories from the White House. And now suddenly they're here acknowledging the obvious, which is that, yes, the president has lost a step. He's not quite how he was even 4 years ago.
He's 81. Meanwhile, the White House is working to tamp down concerns within the party. President Biden is scheduled to speak with Democratic governors tonight. 3 sources say the details are still being hashed out, but it comes after governors held a phone call on Monday to discuss the party's path forward. Separately, NBC News has learned Biden's chief of staff, Jeff Zients, will hold an all-staff call this afternoon where he is expected to tell staff members to weather the storm and keep your heads down. The president spoke with House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries by phone yesterday. It is the first reported conversation between Biden and a member of congressional leadership since the debate. That comes as Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas became the first sitting Democratic member of Congress to publicly call on President Biden to drop out of the race. Here's what he told NBC's Hallie Jackson about the president's debate performance and what he's hearing from voters in his district.
I would say that the input from my constituents has been 10-1 in favor of replacing President Biden on the ticket. You would think after the kind of performance that we saw there, he would be out engaging not with a teleprompter, but with one reporter after another to answer the hard questions that are out there. I think that's more important to me than a cognitive test or anything else, is to demonstrate that last Thursday was an aberration and that he's ready to actively engage and answer all the hard questions again and again. That's the kind of engagement we need to have if he chooses to stay in the race. I hope that he will put country first. I know Trump would never do that, but that he will put country first and decide to step aside, give us a fair, open, democratic with a small d convention.
Jim Vandehei, your piece with Mike Allen for Axios this morning for your Behind the Curtain column is entitled Democrats' Rage at Biden Rises. Explain what you're hearing.
Yeah, I would say we've talked to literally dozens of House members, most of whom aren't going to go on the record yet. The ones who are going to go on the record already have. They're furious. Like, they're just not buying it. Now I would say they're madder about the response to the debate than the debate itself. They can't believe that he's deflecting and saying it's much ado about nothing. They can't believe he's blaming staff for it. And now this idea that an 11-day jet lag would cause you to have a poor debate performance strikes them is a crazy explanation for it. And if you're a member of Congress, to be honest, all you care about is your voters first and your donors second. Yeah, you like the president if he helps you, but if he doesn't, you will turn on him because you care about self-preservation. So they're talking to donors. Donors are furious. Voters are telling them what Lloyd Doggett's voters are telling him, which is we want him to step aside. That's why yesterday We talked to several people who were on multiple calls with a lot of members, and when there was either a show of hands or, hey, should he stay in, almost nobody said that he should stay in. They want Hakeem Jeffries, they want Chuck Schumer, the two Democratic leaders, to go in and talk to him and have a very serious conversation about getting out of the race before the convention so they can have a messy but somewhat orderly transition to somebody else. They believe, and I think they're right, that the Biden family and the Biden staff are trying to keep anybody who might make that case to Biden away from Biden. Now, he started to make calls yesterday. You're correct. But it took him a while. And there's a lot of people in senior positions who love the man, love the president, have been with him from the beginning, who want to have this gut check with him about whether or not he could not only lose the presidency, but cost them the House and Senate. You toss in that Supreme Court ruling, and you have Democrats saying this could be an existential threat to our party, to our majorities, hell, to the country in their own personal views.
So Vice President Kamala Harris is defending President Biden amid calls for him to bow out. In response to Congressman Doggett speaking out against Biden's candidacy, Harris staunchly stood by the president.
And speaking about stakes, you just came out of a fundraiser. We know that many in your party have expressed concerns about President Biden's health. Just this morning, Congressman Doggett said that he's calling on President Biden to withdraw from the race, given that there's too much at stake to risk a Trump victory. What's your response to this?
Look, Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again, period.
Are you ready to lead the country if necessary?
I am proud to be Joe Biden's running mate. Thank you.
Harris also acknowledged Biden's disappointing performance, saying it was not his finest hour, but added the election cannot be decided by one day in June because the stakes are so high. Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn, who played a key role in helping Joe Biden win the presidency in 2020, spoke with MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell yesterday, and Andrea asked him about a potential Kamala Harris candidacy. Take a listen.
Congressman, how would you feel if there is a decision for him to step down, if he decides that, and he has to decide that, or if the party pressures him to do that? How would you feel if they worked around and tried to go around Kamala Harris because of her lack of high poll numbers and popularity and broadly based? Do you think it's hers to have if it is not his?
I will support her if he were to step aside. But I want to support her going forward at some time in the future. I want this ticket to continue to be Biden-Harris. And then we'll see what happens after the next election. No, this party should not in any way do anything to work around Ms. Harris. We should do everything we can to bolster her, whether it's in second place or at the top of the ticket.
Simone, your comments on both of the stories that I just put out there. I'm curious what former presidents are saying, from the Clintons to the Obamas to the Bush family at this point, since democracy is at stake. I think it'll be interesting in the week to come to see how this plays out. But as you see, Congressman Clyburn is standing firmly behind Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Congressman Clyburn has proven to be one of the president, and I would also argue the vice president's staunchest allies in politics, frankly. You know, Mika, as I was thinking about this morning, I thought back to 2019, 2020, when Joe Biden had, swept South Carolina, he swept the Super Tuesday states, and there were all these calls for the other candidates, Democratic candidates in the race, to step down. And then candidate Biden, I staunchly remember him being asked many different times about, should Amy Klobuchar drop out? Should, everyone from Amy Klobuchar to Bernie Sanders, everyone in between. And time again, he said himself that this is a personal decision that candidates will have to make. He himself had to make that decision in the past, and he would never call on someone else to drop out. And I just had to juxtapose that with literally the onslaught of elected people and folks that have known the president for such a very long time, privately and now some publicly, calling for him to step down. To me, it was just astounding. But I will say, Mika, again and again, I think people need to talk to voters, because the elected officials and the donors, I think the donors and the elected officials forget that it is the voters that put the people in the positions. You know, the donors help fuel campaigns, and frankly, given our party system, it doesn't work without them because of the money that is needed. Hello, Citizens United. But it is the people that elect the representatives, from the president to governors to members of Congress to mayors to state representatives. And much more focus, I think, needs to be put on the voters and what they are saying, because it is them who will decide, who I think will be the biggest influence on what unfolds. And lastly, Mika, I really think that a lot of folks, as I've been reading the coverage and talking to folks, I don't know if people are very aware of the rules of the Democratic National Convention, and that there are rules that govern what happens if a nominee has accepted the nomination and then decides to step down, or something happens and they're not the nominee. And there are not many rules, non-existent, frankly, rules that exist if this all happens before the nominee accepts the nomination. Right. So it is not cut and dry, and an orderly democratic process that people have described. That's called a primary process that already played out. So I don't know, Mika.
And Simone, Simone, we're going to hear from some of those voters that you spoke to, a focus group in Pennsylvania after the debate. That's coming up in just a few minutes. So, Eli, reading through your piece about this, the inner circle that's been around Joe Biden, as you write, many of them have been at his side for 40 years. Put them together with his family as well. The advisors and the family seem to be the ones who will make this decision ultimately. Is there any sense that the pressure now that's built over, say, the last 2-3 days even, where you're hearing people saying out loud, Democrats, now elected Democrats, saying out loud that it's time for Biden to step aside, do you get any sense that that message has cracked through, has broken through that inner circle?
I don't know what the metric would be to say that it's broken through, but they're definitely hearing it. They're aware of it. The interview with George Stephanopoulos, that is obviously a sign that they have heard some of these calls from lawmakers, and that they know they have to fix this. They're trying to fix it. They're trying to reassure people. The outreach has been slow. There were a lot of days that went by before the president started really getting on the phone and talking to the people who are important here. He'll obviously, as you said, meet with the governors today. He has started picking up the phone and talking to members of Congress, as far as I understand. What those conversations are like, hard to say. But, you know, I think that, the campaign has pointed at this point to polling, and they've said, well, the debate has not really changed the race. We're only starting to get a sense of the public's reaction to what happened on Thursday night, what they saw from the president. I think Simone is right. The voters are going to have a lot to do with this, public perceptions, public support. If the president's support craters, if we're looking at a place where states like New Hampshire and Minnesota are suddenly now in play for Donald Trump, that's not a race that the president can win. And so I think that his inner circle, as cloistered as they have been, as much as they have tried to kind of, circle the wagons around the president here in the last week or so, they are realists. They are seeing all these polls. The president is seeing all these polls. And I'm sure that if they continue to mount, if we hear more calls from more senior members of Congress for him to consider stepping aside, I think that will weigh heavily on this president, certainly on the senior staff as well.
And by the way, that interview with George Stephanopoulos takes place on Friday. I misspoke earlier. I said it was today. It only feels like Friday here on 4th of July Eve. So, Jim Bandahai, I'm curious, you are so plugged in Washington. You have such good instincts about these things. What is your sense of how this might play out over the next couple of days? A long 4th of July weekend here coming up, a lot of time for the president to speak with his advisors and his family. And if he does, in fact, decide to take the extraordinary step of dropping out of the race, how confident are Democrats in what comes next? It's kind of a great unknown, whether it's Kamala Harris or it goes to the convention and something else happens. How are Democrats feeling about what potentially, if he does take this step, could come after Joe Biden?
What Simone said is correct. It's going to be about the voters. So what you need to watch for are the polls. If you start to see states like Minnesota, New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Virginia move towards Trump, that is going to be DEFCON 1. People are going to be freaking out. If you start to see swing polls, swing state polls for House races and Senate races start to dip, that's when you're going to see intense pressure on members of Congress to go as a delegation or individually and talk to the president about stepping down. I think if that's going to happen, it probably happens over the next week to 10 days. So let's play it out. Let's say that does happen. There's a lot of Democrats who say, yes, it's going to be messy, everything in politics is messy. But if you have to pick a new ticket, there are advantages to that, right? You would come out of the convention with two much younger candidates. You'd get a hell of a lot of attention because it would be a spectacle unlike any seen in recent American politics. The money would flow. There's lots of money in America. If people want to back it, they'd figure out a way to get it to them. And then you have, 7 to 8 weeks to be able to prove that this ticket is a superior alternative to Trump. And getting lost in this is that Trump, he's seeing some benefit, it looks like, in the polls, but it's not like people are racing to embrace Donald Trump. They're racing to say, we have deep, deep concerns about President Biden and his fitness for office, given his age, given his performance in the debate. That's a very logical position for voters to have because they saw what we saw, and that's what you keep hearing members of Congress and governors say. You can't unsee what you saw, and they know that that has an effect on voters because they're human. They have parents. They have grandparents. They've seen what happens when people start to get older and they start to get tired. Even the jet lag thing on 11 days, like you wouldn't say that about most of your parents or grandparents at 81, that it would take them 11 days to recover. So there's a human reaction to it. And so, yes, it would be messy. Yes, it would be unprecedented, but it's not like it's impossible.
Co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim Vandehei, and White House reporter at Politico, Eli Stokols. Thank you both so much for your reporting this morning.